Welcome back to Fox 5's On the Hill Live this Sunday morning. You know, most of the results of Maryland's primaries are in. Wes Moore, as we told you at the top of this program, has accepted the Democratic nomination for governor. Dan Cox will be the Republican nominee, but the battle for Montgomery County executive is still a very tight race. Robert McCartney has been covering politics in our area for the Washington Post for decades. He is now the host of the Think Regionally podcast with the Washington Council of Governments, and it's our pleasure to welcome Bob back here this Sunday morning. I want to start with the Republican primary in Maryland. Dan Cox was going up against Kelly Schultz. Donald Trump had endorsed Dan Cox. Larry Hogan, the governor, had endorsed Kelly Schultz. How surprising was it that Cox ultimately won that race?
Well, if you looked at the polls during the campaign, it wasn't that surprising because the polls always had Cox very competitive with Schultz. But I think if you'd asked most people at the beginning of the race, they would have said Schultz was going to win going away. Larry Hogan had been governor for 2 terms. He was one of the most popular governors in the country. But the Republicans turned their back on Larry Hogan and went with someone much further to the right, really the polar opposite of Larry Hogan within the Republican Party.
Now, on the Democratic side, you could have fielded a baseball team with all the Democrats that were running in the gubernatorial primary. But in that group, you had a former chairman of the Democratic National Committee, Tom Perez. You had Doug Gansler, who was the former attorney general who had won statewide. You had Peter Franchot, who's been the Democratic comptroller of Maryland for 15 years. These are experienced politicians. Wes Moore's never run for an elective office in his life. How was that Wes Moore able to pull that off?
Well, I think Moore is a very charismatic candidate. He ran a very good campaign. He has a very attractive life story. And he emerged as the, if you will, the premier African-American candidate. And if you look at the results, he did it extremely well in black majority districts, Prince George's County, Baltimore City, black areas of Baltimore County. And I think to some extent, the other candidates split the vote.
Now, there's a political reality in Maryland that there's a 2-to-1 margin of Democratic voters to Republican voters in the state. Larry Hogan couldn't have got elected without Democrats voting for him. Would Dan Cox, heading into November, be able to get Democrats to vote for him?
I think it's extremely unlikely. Cox is the opposite of the kind of Republican who historically has won in Maryland. If you're a Republican in Maryland, you have to win not just independents, but as you said, moderate Democrats. And Cox is, an ardent pro-Trumper. He chartered 3 buses to go to the January 6th assault on the Capitol. He tweeted that Mike Pence was a traitor on January 6th. He's very strongly anti-abortion in a pro-choice state. And I just think he's the opposite of what the Maryland as a whole is likely to want.
Let's look at Maryland's largest jurisdiction, Montgomery County. We still do not know who is winning we know who's leading right now, and that's Mark Elwert's, only about a couple of hundred votes, about 300 points as of last night. David Blair is the challenger there. These two were separated by 77 votes 4 years ago. How do we get again into the position where these two are darn near tied, and we're still waiting for a slew of mail-in votes to be counted?
Well, I think there's a real division within Montgomery County over the issue of development and economic growth. And basically, people who are sort of wary of too much development and don't want the county to get too crowded have opted for Elrich. But a lot of people are concerned that the county isn't generating enough jobs, isn't building enough housing, and those people have tended to vote for Blair. So there's just a very, real even divide, I think, within the county on that issue, and that's what you're seeing in these election results.
There is a lot of talk right now that we need to do a better job at counting votes. State Senator Cheryl Kagan told us the other day that she had introduced the bill and got it passed out of the legislature to speed up the counting of votes. Is there going to be momentum for that in Maryland, given the fact that here we are heading a week after and we still don't know who's won some of these races?
Well, I think that if Wes Moore does win the governorship, as a lot of people expect, that they'll change the law and allow the mail-in votes to be counted before the Election Day, which is how most states do it. That isn't happening in Maryland only because Larry Hogan vetoed the bill. I think he did it to burnish his conservative credentials nationwide. All
right. Bob McCartney, former Washington Post regional correspondent and now the host of a fantastic podcast, Think Regionally. It's well worth time. Bob,
thank you.
Thanks so much. Great to see you.